and and this all came in crisis in 2011, right? Um, there was just before, of course, the date that marks the change in all this is the 15 May 2011, right? But before that, and there was first the socialist government at that point underwent the first austerity measures, right, which involve the firing of public workers, cuts in the health service, cuts in education, right, and a tax raise in BTA and indirect taxes, the ones that affects everyone actually. So that was a key point, and they changed the constitution in the summer of 2010, almost overnight, to get the payment of debt as a constitutional principle. Yeah, and they did it. They did it overnight, from one day to another. They did an express sort of session in parliament, and both parties, PP and PSOE, were for it, and without consulting to not having a referendum or anything. They changed the constitution. We were having told for ages that the constitution was no one could touch it, but they did it, and in that sense, and it also was a little bit before 15 May 2011. There was a big agreement from PP, PSOE, and the trade unions in order to raise the age of retirement, right, and to cut pensions, right. So this was a bit. It wasn't the first time this was happening, but at that point, like it was the last, it was the decisive factor that made people realize, right, and that particularly on the side of PSOE, which has during years captured part of the left, or we can call the social left, right, to feel that there was no hope with them, and that there was no hope either in the two big trade unions, which are linked to both to the ex-Communist Party and to the Socialist Party. They were signing the agreement, so there was nothing to expect from what we had as an institutional political setting, right? And that brought 15M as a movement. I don't know if you know a bit how this 15M movement came to being, but it was actually a demonstration, a massive demonstration, in which some young people, started to camp in a central plaza. It's called Puerta del Sol, Central Square in Madrid. This brought about the cops to try to evict them from the square, and they came back and camped again, right? And the thing that changed everything is that the day after, there weren't just 20, 30 youngsters camping in Puerta del Sol, but they had hundreds of people coming to support them. And this will, by every day, in about 2 weeks, bring more and more people to Puerta del Sol.
Wait, did they use Facebook and Twitter to?
They did, because the media didn't say much, because they didn't know. I mean, for the mainstream media, they didn't even know what was happening. They didn't even know how to call it. I mean, for them, it was just some completely abnormal phenomena. They took them weeks to try to interpret what was happening. They are left, but they are not PSOE. What is this? It was for them. It was very, 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 very strange. But Twitter worked, Facebook worked, and also more traditional sort of word was working, and also there was. That those 2 weeks were previous to a local election, just like the ones we are going to have now, and that a bit triggered people, triggered people like of unease and unrest to go out to the streets, right? And there was a like a climax moment in which, because in Spain we have, before the election day, we have what we call jornada de reflexión, like reflection day. No political campaigning can be done on that day, right? So the government sort of forbid the concentrations in the Plaza del Sol, and there was a completely massive response to that, massive. And when I say massive, I mean you couldn't not just enter the Plaza de Puerta del Sol, but just come near. It was completely packed with people. It was very amazing, right? So after the camp was dismantled, there was still a cycle of mobilizations, of mass mobilizations, that lasted for about 1 year, 1.5 years. This was unseen of in the recent history of Spain. We were talking about demonstrations with 200,000, 300,000 people, not involving any major political organization, just sort of self-organization, right? This was absolutely unheard of, and brought about many people. Don't think this was a thing of the militants. Of course we were there, but it was people that was just fed up and came to the square and came to the demonstrations without having been involved in politics for a long time. And also there was an effect in which we, the younger generations, would push the older generations to go to these demonstrations, because this is all the thing about the middle class falling apart, right? And this was felt in a very generational way, right? It wasn't our parents who were in economical problems. It was us who were in. But an important thing of the middle class condition is to have the feeling that you're going to be able to reproduce it, that your kids are going to live better than you, and are going to have more opportunities than you. That's part of the middle class ideology. When that crumbles, when you see that there is all going in the other direction, that sort of crushes the whole middle class illusion of not having to fight for anything, right? And that was what was happening in those days, and has happened until now, because many things that were sort of settled in 15M and are still present today. So it's important also to take in mind, or to have in mind, this has changed with time, but 15M was a very, 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 very radical stance, right? It sort of considered that any sort of political party, trade union, or even lesser forms of established organizations weren't good. They had betrayed the necessities or the needs of the people, and they were to be pushed aside, right? And there were endless general assemblies that would last for hours and hours and hours, in which everything was discussed. I mean, there wasn't really a political program.
It's like the Occupy movement.
It was. I think it was bigger in its forms is very similar, but in its reach, I think this was wider.
Right.
Wider.
Right.
Was
it concentrated in Spain, in Madrid, or was
I was going to say I was going to say exactly that. It was.
Why don't we let him finish his presentation?
all right.
Oh no! If you have factual doubts, you can interrupt me. No problem. No problem. And it was very big in Madrid. It was very, very big in Barcelona. This was something very novel as well, very new for Spanish politics, because always Madrid and Barcelona has been divergent. They have each city has had its own political dynamics, but this come together for the first time. In Barcelona, it was Plaza Catalunya, which was the big square, and they had an occupation there for many years. They were tried to be evicted, and they came back being the double of the people they were at the first time. It was incredible, and in all medium and small cities of the country, there was camping at some sort of square. There were people that were out in the streets making demands. It was actually quite impressive. For in Madrid and Barcelona, it arrived to be massive, but for the small cities and the medium-sized cities, it was about the first thing that happened politically in years. In many years. So it was something very important. Anyway, well, I was telling you about the radical stance that 15M had, very similar to Occupy, rejection of the big political institutions, the assembly as a way of making politics, and there wasn't a political program, but there was a political spirit in it. The first thing that was demanded was economic democracy, right? It was for economic reasons that people went out to the streets, right? There were plenty of slogans in 15M. There wasn't, of course, a program, but there were slogans. And one of the most successful one is, "This is not a crisis, this is a scam." No es una crisis, es una estafa, right? Another one was, and because right after the demands for economical democracy, economic justice, came the demands for the political democracy, for democracy as a form of government, and the demise of bipartisanism. Another slogan was PSOE y PP la misma mierda es. Popular Party and the PSOE party are the same crap, right? And another very important one was no nos representan. They don't represent us, right? And that's important because that's the shape of the political crisis, a crisis of representation, right? So for about 2 years we had these massive demonstrations going on every now and then, every 2 months or so. But then the movement sort of mutated into something different. First, when the camp was dismantled, a territorial organization was set in the cities. The assemblies went to districts, right? And there was like a general assembly of the city in Madrid who would sort of pick up what was happening in every district, right? So that was the way in which it mutated. But there were some other forms of struggle that were particularly important. There were very strong struggles related to the public services. The institutions of the welfare state, right? That is health and education. We had what we call the tides, las mareas. And these are forms of mobilization that weren't like the previous sectoral sort of labor mobilizations, but were different because they held together the communities that are built around those services, around those public assets. For example, in health, in the health system, it was both the doctors, the nurses, the non-medical staff of hospitals, and the patients that will demonstrate together, right? And in education, it was more or less the same thing. It was the teachers, it was the pupils, and it was the parents that will demonstrate together. So it showed us in a way how the public can turn into the common, right? When public assets are sort of creating a community that tends or demands the democratic sort of management of those assets by the people that are either work or use them, we are sort of in a different setting than the classic sort of public services. So, yeah?
Who provided the leadership in terms of getting to that place? Who provided, I mean, was there a group, was it Podemos that you?
This is all before Podemos was born.
Okay, but there must have been some people providing the leadership.
It was rather spontaneous, actually. Yeah, it wasn't a strategical sort of move going to the struggles in those, but rather it was just the whole flow of things that would lead us to that, because austerity, in the first place, has got those public services as targets, right? And let's say that whereas before M15, we would have classic labor mobilizations, the spirit of M15 was creating these sort of new mobilizations with open assemblies in workplaces that will gather all the people, all the stakeholders, if you want, those that are interested in. But it wasn't actually like at that point there is nothing like a, let's say, political entity that sort of directed the movement in one sense or another, right?